Welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. Now, the two-front war is usually taken to mean a country's war against two conventional militaries. India's military uses it to refer to a conflict scenario with two nuclear-armed states, China and Pakistan. But Israel's two-front war is different. It faces two fronts against two non-state actors, both of whom hold territory, Hamas in the south and Hezbollah in the north, and possibly even a third front with the Houthis in Yemen over 2,000 kilometers south. Now, joining me to discuss the dynamics of what we are seeing now is foreign policy analyst and South Asia head with the Eurasia Group, Pramit Pal Chaudhari. Pramit, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Pramit, I want to start by asking you about this very interesting conundrum that we are witnessing, that you have a Shia revolution in Iran in 1979, and Khomeini then takes up a Sunni Arab cause of the Palestinians. Explain to us why Iran is possibly the only Muslim country in the world today that's actively engaged in conflict with Israel.
This comes down to the fact that the Islamic Revolution in Iran also portrayed itself as the leader of the Islamic world, that it was represented the change that would incorporate the Arab world as well. But as you correctly said, Iran is neither Arab nor Sunni. It is Persian and it is Shia. So automatically, it is traditionally not seen as a country that can lead the Arab world, which is why Khomeini actually said once, we have to be more Arab than the Arab. Right. And the easiest cause for them to collect, especially once they began fighting with Arab nations like Iraq, was Israel. That was the one thing they knew the Arab street would rally on. And I should add, there's one other country that had a similar, should we say similar idea, was Turkey. Again, non-Arab, but they at least are Sunni.
Right.
But Erdogan, for example, actually reversed many decades of friendship between Turkey and Israel for the same purpose. That he's had this, quote, neo-Ottoman foreign policy, and part of that required him to win over the Arab world. So he again picked on Israel. And I should add, Khomeini did the same thing. The Shah of Iran had an excellent relationship with the Israelis.
Absolutely,
because they both saw the Arabs as common enemies or rivals. So he have actually reversed the same thing. And I can remember when the relationship with Iran and Israel deteriorated, Israel actually turned to India. And they had diplomats come here and tell the Indian side, since you still have open lines of communication with home as well as Tehran, please tell them what is the cause of the conflict here? We're not interested. We don't have a problem with you. You're too far away. But ultimately, it was this ideological issue that for the Islamic Revolution's own legitimacy, and I think partly because of their own failures on the domestic front in Iran, positioning themselves as the country in the Islamic world that was the only one prepared to take on Israel, has become even more important. And on top of that, of course, as we've seen, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and many of the Gulf Emiratis had been trying to normalize their relationship with Israel.
Right.
And they are regional rivals, direct regional rivals to Iran. I mean, not just in the larger Arab world, but in the Persian Gulf itself.
Right, and Iran has now ringed Israel with this, network of proxies. You have Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and you have this very interesting series of videos that Hezbollah has been teasing, saying that Sheikh Nasrallah is going to release a speech tomorrow. Do you think that Hezbollah is going to actually actively join the fight against Israel?
Well, they haven't already in a sense, because they've been firing odd batches of missiles, nothing major, given the size of their arsenal, which probably runs into tens of thousands of missiles. As Arab journalists will tell you, Hezbollah is about 10 times the size of Hamas in terms of its military capacity.
It's very well resourced. It's supposed to be the world's biggest non-state actor.
Correct. And it really is a state within a state, given how weak Lebanon is. Lebanon is barely functional as a state. So yes, Iran has been able to penetrate. I mean, Hamas, which was effectively the Palestinian arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. Now keep in mind, the Muslim Brotherhood was fighting the Shia or the Alawi regime in Syria during the civil war recently. So in effect, the Muslim Brotherhood was attacking an ally of Iran in Syria. But after that war is over, Iran has been prepared to strike a deal or support Hamas. It's been supporting them for a while. But the greater ability, the use of the Palestinians for the Israeli card or the Jewish card that they're playing in the Arab world basically meant that they were prepared to strike a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood, at least on that arm of the Muslim Brotherhood. But Hezbollah has always been the arm of the Iranian Islamic Revolution. They have been, partly because they have literally no other external ally. It is the only country that the other Sunni Arab countries don't support and will not work with Hezbollah for obvious reasons. But it has been also the most effective of the Iranian militia. Iran has several militia, Shia militia in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, and other parts of the world.
It's possibly the country with the largest number of these kind of proxies.
It has an interesting sort of informal empire.
Right.
Rather than trying to directly control Iraq or directly control Syria, it tries to have effectively a military structure or agency in each of these countries, or several of them, which is more powerful than any other military organization in that region.
Right.
So in effect, Hezbollah is more powerful than the Lebanese army, which is barely existent, right? The various Shia militia in Iraq are arguably as strong as, if not stronger than, the Iraqi military or the Iraqi government's ability. So they basically say, as long as we have veto power on what that country does, we stop there. We don't have to rule the country. But it is
you should have a lever of influence on that country.
But they have no interest, or they don't have a policy of trying to build up that country, do development, win hearts and minds. So that's not our issue.
Right.
We win the Shia population in those countries, but we maintain the ability that any government in that country will always look to Tehran and say, is it okay what we're doing? Because we know that you can undermine this. It's a sort of negative power, if you wish. It's not a positive power. It's not about, we're not going to build an example or model for the rest of the world, but it keeps them in a position. So between Lebanon all the way to effectively the border of Pakistan is a giant Iranian protectorate.
Yeah, it's a Shia super state.
Correct.
Yeah, you can drive from the Mediterranean right up to the Arabian Sea without crossing.
But it's interesting because it's not a state. Right. It's this strange. It's a protectorate, if you wish, but it's not ruled directly by Iran. It just has the ability to make sure that it has its way in that way. And so Hezbollah, though, is in many ways the first real example of this. It was the most successful and
the earliest example.
It is the earliest, and in many ways is the model for what they've done now in Syria and Iraq and elsewhere. They've set up these militias. They even have supposedly a militia of Indian Shia. Who don't operate obviously in India, but they've been recruited and live in the Iraqi area.
Right. In fact, we have this story on Sheikh Nasrallah, the enigmatic leader of the Hezbollah. Let's watch.
Exactly 6 days after the audacious Hamas terror attack on Israel, Iran's foreign minister met Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Qatar's Doha, openly confirming its support for the terror outfit. The following day, cross-border clashes near Israel intensified as Hamas's Al-Qassam brigade fired around 20 rockets from Lebanon on northern Israel. At the same time, Hezbollah fired guided missiles at Israeli military posts along the northern borders. All this on the orders of one man, Hassan Nasrallah. The man many in the West, especially the media, are speculating can unleash a wider war in the Middle East.
Whether they're capable of getting into a regional, yes, they are. They can. But the point is, Iran gets hurt in retaliation. Bombing Lebanon is not going to, bombing the militia, bombing Hezbollah targets is one side of it. But it's Iran. If it's a regional war, Iran will be involved and Iran will hurt very badly. So they don't want to do that. Iranians will not ask Nasrallah to start a war just until they are ready to take care of this.
Born in Beirut, Hassan Nasrallah is a Lebanese cleric and political leader who is the Secretary General of Hezbollah. In July 2006, with the commencement of hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah, Nasrallah burst into the spotlight.
الأمريكي يريد أن يغطي على الحقيقة أن المشكلة هي أمن إسرائيل وليست أمن أمريكا.
2006, Hezbollah war with Israel. very intelligent. They moved in, they crossed the border undetected. They cut the fence between Lebanon and Israel. They moved in, disabled a tank, killed the soldiers, captured some other soldiers who had come to see what had happened. 3 soldiers, they dragged them across the border before Israel even knew what had happened. The Hezbollah, for example, had capabilities which people didn't know earlier. They have trained operatives who speak Hebrew. They could tap onto their Israeli communications.
Is he really the leader that the Islamic world projects him to be? Or is he just a face behind the real culprit?
See, Nasrallah, you have to understand, is a proxy of the Iranians. Okay, and has been one all his life, and he'll remain one till he stays alive. He's not stupid. I will not be down and say that they're dumb people and they don't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing.
The bluff master. Nasrallah comes across as one of the most influential Islamic leaders of his time. Unlike his predecessors, he knows the art of deception. It is during his leadership that the Hezbollah acquired rockets with a longer range and advanced ammunitions. For instance, in Israel's Operation Accountability in 1993, when much of the Lebanese infrastructure was destroyed, he made an agreement with Israel to end its attacks in Lebanon, and once Israeli forces withdrew, the hostilities resumed from Hezbollah's side soon after. The same happened in the 1996 Operation Grapes of Wrath. The survivor.
When there are such wars by terrorists, the survivors are the smartest. The ones who have survived years of proxy against the Israeli, American, whatever, Indian special forces, army, military forces. The ones who survive are the dangerous ones because they are smart enough to have survived all these years. And Nasrallah is one of them.
The voice of Hezbollah. Apart from being a political leader, Nasrallah also drives the narrative of Hezbollah through his writings and speeches. Voice of Hezbollah is one such book that he authored and got published in 2007. The book has been translated to many languages, including English from Arabic. It made Nasrallah one of the foremost voices of the Hezbollah. The Hawk of Lebanon. So adored is Nasrallah in West Asia, especially by Lebanese people, that he is a cult figure. So much so that 2 popular songs were written about him during the 2006 Israel-Hezbollah war. The Hawk of Lebanon in the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and Yalla Ya Nasrallah in Lebanon. The Hawk of Lebanon is written by little-known Palestinian boy band Firqat al-Shamal, Band of the North, at the height of 2006 Israel-Lebanese conflict. Such is the following of Hassan Nasrallah. Is it intentionally projected to deceive the world by Iran, or is it merely a legend? We will find out when Israel faces off with the Hezbollah, its biggest adversary.
Pramit, the New York Times once called Sheikh Nasrallah the only leader in the Middle East who actually says what he does what he says. How important is he in this scheme of things right now?
Well, he's the man who's really, he's now become a bit of a legend in the Arab world and definitely in the Shia world, because he's been able to not only build Hezbollah to what it is today. So if you look at what is Hezbollah's situation, especially over the past decade, they've seen Lebanon effectively collapse, but they have maintained their coherence. So especially in the southern Lebanese area and the Shia areas, they're by far the number one most powerful non-state actor, as you said, a militia within Lebanon. At one point, they were just one among several. There were the Druze, there were the Maronites, and each of them had their own little private army. All of those are now gone or been reduced in many ways to vassals of Hezbollah. But nobody.
Amal was another big militia that's collapsed.
And a Shia one too. But that basically has now actually been absorbed into Hezbollah. And then you had a Syrian civil war where Hezbollah got involved. But Nasrallah has been, I would argue, very interesting. He has been, I would say, reasonably careful of how he uses Hezbollah. Right. He could have gotten drawn into a huge battle in Syria to support the Alawi regime. And he did deploy, he fought, But he kept himself to a certain limits as to what he would do. So it took a battle for the Alawis to win, but they had to do the bulk of the fighting themselves. But the other thing, of course, that built his legend was that he took on the Israelis earlier on, about a decade ago, when the Israelis attacked southern Lebanon. And I wouldn't say it wasn't a victory for either side, but just to be able to fight the Israelis to a draw made Hezbollah a legend within the Arab world, given the sort of the myth of invincibility that everybody else had regarding the fact that you could fight them to a draw was considered an accomplishment. And you may remember there was a New Yorker article, I think by Seymour Hersh, describing how the one country that tried very hard to kill him was Saudi Arabia, because he was seen as so powerful a proxy for Iranian influence in that area. And that Hersh met Nasrallah in this sort of bunker down in the ground and somewhere outside Beirut. And he was saying, there's some Saudi intelligence men walking around with suitcases full of money and saying, we'll pay you anything, any number. You can write a blank check to anybody who will assassinate Nasrallah for us.
But Pramit, can it be argued, for instance, that Hezbollah doesn't really have to cross the blue line? Right, the kind of pressure that they're exerting on Israel, it's keeping 100,000 IDF soldiers there along the border. So, do you think if this continues, this deployment continues, that's so many fewer soldiers that could be deployed in the south with the Hamas?
I think Hezbollah and slash Iran feel they have to show that they are giving support to Hamas, because then it allows them to position for propaganda purposes to the Arab and Islamic world that we were the only guys who actually
were fighting the Israelis,
fighting the Israelis on behalf of the Palestinians, and what were the Sauds and the others doing? Nothing, at least nothing compared to us. They were giving humanitarian assistance. We were doing the real stuff. But again, without actually blooding themselves beyond a certain point, they're exposing themselves an issue. The real question, I think, really happens is that if the full-scale border assault by the Israelis takes place, and they get bogged down in Gaza. So let's say get involved in house-to-house fighting and so on, in which both the casualty rates become high, but more importantly, the amount of time you expend keeps building up. And then, of course, the Arab street explodes. This is the big concern even the United States has. At that point, the question is, does then Hezbollah decide to up the game? That with the IDF
so heavily bogged down,
stuck in Gaza. The other Arab countries being forced to back down in favor because of public opinion, even Western public opinion switching strongly against Israelis as the casualty rates pile up. Is that the opportunity? But again, I agree. Hezbollah would be mad. I don't think they have the capacity to invade Israel on the infantry, but it's where the rockets come in. This kinetic war is really quite what is interesting, that we're going this way, where they can keep launching hundreds and hundreds of missiles. And knowing that the IDF would find it very difficult to launch a second front in which they would assault on the ground, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. An air war, yes, but again, you're stretching yourself here. Israel there can be no greater national security state than Israel, but it's still a small country. And to be fighting, as you said, a two-front war
with two non-state actors controlling territory.
Plus, you have a number of your security men pinned down in the West Bank to defend the settlers and so on. You are in effect fighting a three-front war, because your army is not that large, and there's an economic cost, as the IMF and World Bank have already warned that the GDP growth rates are now turning negative, as literally they've emptied all their factories out. Every single male in the workforce is now effectively a reservist.
In fact, we have this interesting story on Hezbollah about what makes it the world's most heavily armed non-state actor. Let's watch it. Will Hezbollah join in Israel's Gaza war? That's the big question, because if Hezbollah joins this war, it opens up a second front for Israel. Hezbollah is larger, it's better resourced, it has an annual budget of over $700 million a year, and in fact, it's the world's largest guerrilla army. It has over 45,000 foot soldiers, over 100,000 rockets, kamikaze drones, and anti-ship missiles.
The consequences of Israelis actually taking on any offensive towards north is really going to rattle a separate region altogether. The Arabs in the south and the Shias related to Iran in the north. I suppose Israel would prevent that, and I don't think so the even world is going to allow this kind of a setting to upset the apple cart. But if it happens, I suppose it will make matters more complex than they already are.
If they wish to enter the war, that's their choice. They've already started some firing. Once in a while, they would carry out some attacks inside Israel in the last few days. But it's not going to be of any benefit to them at all. They know it. If they do some kind of a more official kind of a entry into what's going on, they will pay very heavily for it. It's the entire Lebanon which will pay for it. The civilians who are got nothing to do with this. They do not support the Hezbollah.
Hezbollah fought the Israeli military to a standstill in the 2006 war in Lebanon. But Israel severely degraded Hezbollah's military capabilities. Since then, Hezbollah has been quietly rebuilding its arsenal and biding its time.
In 2006, there was a major war where Israel learned its lessons how to deal with Hezbollah. They would certainly sympathize with Hamas. They might even synchronize certain operations, but at the moment, Hamas is doing not very much because they have done what they did on the 7th and a day or two later. But I suppose Hamas is going to be quiet and very difficult for Hezbollah to coordinate anything, because then they would be seen as an isolated entity on offensive against Israel. And Israel would not want to press any offensive in that direction.
Hezbollah and its patron Iran have expressed solidarity with Hamas for the dastardly October 7th terror attack.
If Iran is definitely interested in creating problems for Iran will lose. 75 years of Arab-Israeli warfare has taught everybody that this is not something that anybody can win. So do the other Arabs want to take a chance on it? No, they do not. They do not want to get involved. They do not want to support anything. Iran wants to do this because of their regime, who they are. If by providing all this supplies and equipment and food and money and whatever it is, weapons that are being supplied to the Hezbollah and to the Hamas by the Iranians, they are a party to this.
The United States has moved in 2 carrier strike groups into the Mediterranean to dissuade Iran and Hezbollah from entering the conflict.
I personally do not think there will be a major conflagration of larger number of countries. I don't think so. Finally, good sense will prevail. Blinken has been twice to Israel in 7 days. And then, of course, first statement of President Biden was a very strong statement. But now President Biden's statement is all Hamas must be sorted out and all that. But we do not want escalation. We want humanitarian relief to Palestinian people. So there is a but that has come up in the course of sanity, rationality is coming in after 7 days. So I think there would be forces at work to stop the conflagration going beyond control. Hamas is, it can't be written off so easily like this.
So that was Hezbollah, the world's most heavily armed non-state actor. Deepak, non-state actors armed with ballistic missiles. How terrifying is that?
It's a terrifying prospect. What makes it even more so is that Israel is surrounded on 3 sides by non-state actors, each of them possessing such projectiles. You've got Hezbollah towards the north, you've got the Gaza Strip towards the east, and in the south, the Houthis have now declared a new front. There was this news about missiles being intercepted over the Red Sea.
Yes.
They were fired from Yemen and targeted at, I think this one was at Eilat, which is a port city in southern Israel. Now the Iron Dome and the other systems can only go so far.
Right.
So this will be problematic for Israel.
Pramit, what role did Major General Qasem Soleimani play in rearing all these non-state actors? I mean, how central was he to this whole plot?
Well, I mean, it's difficult to say that a single individual, the Revolutionary Guard, is a professional force.
Yeah.
And like any professional force, it doesn't revolve around one person. But what he was basically renowned for was that in the really huge fight, which is in Iraq, taking on the Islamic State and then waging the civil war, he in many ways was the man who built the Revolutionary Guard and then these militias.
The Quds Force.
Across this entire spectrum. So if you looked at it, if you wish, before the collapse of Iraq or the US invasion and all of this that followed, the Islamic Al-Quds Force, the Revolutionary Guard, were basically largely in only Iran.
Right.
They did a little bit of activity, supported a little terrorist action here and there, and they had this outpost in Hezbollah.
Right.
But the building of that informal empire, as I said, that now exists all across this entire region, was basically what is basically happened during his term when he was in charge, and that's one of the things that he is remembered for, as in Iran and elsewhere, as the man who made this empire and set up, in many ways, we believe, set up the strategy that what we did in Lebanon, we do it again. We don't try to control Lebanon.
Right.
We don't rule the government. We don't have a viceroy there. We just have the ability to tell anybody in Lebanon, we're the most powerful single institution here. Don't do anything without asking us.
Right. In fact, talking about the informal empire, that's a very nice coinage, by the way. The antagonist to that informal empire, Saudi Arabia, it's a key player in the Middle East again. And the Saudi defense minister was in Washington recently, and they had a meeting with the US NSA, and they had released a joint statement actually mentioning non-state actors.
Right.
And how is Saudi Arabia looking at this whole developing situation?
See, the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, with things like the ITU-2, which incorporates India in it, and IMEC, which was announced just after the G20 summit, effectively tried to position, I would argue, a rival vision of the Middle East.
Yes.
And at the heart of that was that, okay, we don't want to fight or cannot fight on an ideological basis, because in many ways that's what exactly Saudi Arabia is trying to move away from, that they're trying to reduce or dilute their Wahhabi background.
And plus they've burned their fingers in Yemen very badly, almost a decade.
And then the second part is that we don't have military capacity.
Yeah.
Because what is happening is that the Americans are leaving the Middle East.
Right.
That is pretty clear, that slowly, bit by bit, the US is losing interest. There's no longer a political consensus in Washington about expending blood and treasure to maintain the stability of the Middle East. Right? You had Obama, who wanted to basically dramatically reduce the American presence in the Middle East. You had Trump, who came in but was not prepared to actually do very much. And you have Biden saying that, yes, we will support Israel, but we are never going to deploy troops to fight in Iraq or Kuwait or anything like that. If you look at his interim national security guidelines that he issued just about 2 years after he came to power, it's an interesting document, because the Middle East, a list of priorities of American foreign policy and security policy, Middle East is reduced to the same level as Africa. Right. And it says very implicitly there, Afghanistan is the one place we must abandon immediately.
Yes.
That this is no longer core to America. And at the heart of this is the fact that China has arrived on the horizon, and this is by far the biggest and most powerful enemy America has ever faced in its history. So their view is everything focuses on China, Middle East automatically goes down. So you had countries like UAE and Saudi Arabia say, okay, how do we keep our region stable? As the Americans are no longer prepared to do that game anymore. So what is their strength? It's economics. It's their money power. And they look at whatever else about Iran. If you look at Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, economics has not been their strength. Even Iran's economy has been a mess. So their view is, as I said, they tried a military strategy in Yemen, failed. Tried to bring in mercenaries, did everything they could, didn't work. So their game is, ITU-2, IMEC were designed to effectively create connectivity, trade, investment corridors, and slowly build up, position the Southern Gulf as we are the economic wonder. We are the guys who can make your GDP 10 times more. Iran can give you ideology,
Right.
but what else does it give you? Nothing on the money side. But a key element of that was to normalize the relationship with Israel. And that was the weakness that they had, because in my view, Netanyahu made a mistake. In his delusion was that I will absorb the West Bank, and I will strike a deal with Hamas, in effect, and go after the Palestinian Authority.
Yes.
Which was effectively the exact reverse, for example, of India's policy of the Palestinians, which is we support Palestine, but only the Palestinian Authority because it is secular.
Yes.
So we will not support an Islamicist Palestinian nationhood. So, but he moved around in this direction, and this was ultimately, I would argue, Netanyahu's folly, because he denuded the southern border, transferred 26 battalions of the IDF to the West Bank to support the settlers. But in fact, as soon as he did that, Hamas stabbed him in the back, which is, in my view, not a surprise at all, because whether Hamas did it on its own or did it with Iranian backing is irrelevant. For them, either of them would have done it. It made perfect sense.
So that final piece of the puzzle, which is the Saudi-Israeli peace deal, that's off the table now, it looks like, post October 7th.
Certainly. The game now is, does the Abraham Accords survive? Because that is the real touchstone of everything. ITU2, IMEC, all live off the Abraham Accords. So if that falls apart, so that's why UAE, Saudi Arabia are both somewhat defensive about what is happening, critical of Israel, but they keep making it clear, that especially for UAE, which is the heart of the Abraham Accords, that we're not changing the relationship with Israel. We're not the normalized, which is why they look at Gaza and they get worried, because if the body bags build up, the humanitarian the crisis there reaches a certain threshold, they will find it very difficult to sustain the Abraham Accords. So both IMEC and ITU2 are on pause. That's all right, but though without Israel, it doesn't work in many ways, right? Because if you look at the geography, it's the only country that a container going from Mumbai to Dubai, heading to Europe, it has to go through Israel. Because Lebanon is a disaster. And Jordan doesn't have a port in the Mediterranean. And Suez we already use, and it's too small. It's not modern enough for the purposes of what we're talking about. So all of these hang on that, but Abraham Accords is the core. As long as that holds, it is possible to resuscitate the economic corridors at some future date. But if the Abraham Accords fall apart, then we're back to square one.
And do you see that happening the longer this war drags? Because from the looks of it, it seems like it's going to be a slow, grinding battle. The Israelis are saying that it's going to take several weeks, if not months, to achieve their objectives. So does that threaten the Abraham Accords?
It does, and I think it's hopefully something that Israel factors into its own calculations, because it would benefit greatly from the Abraham Accords to lose the Gulf countries and Morocco and other countries that had normalized. It was, in many ways, remember the Camp David Accords brought in Jordan and Egypt, and then it stalled, and no other Arab country would do it. And then you suddenly had this breakthrough in which you had a whole swath of countries in the Gulf coming on board. Your weakness always was Iran, because Iran looking at this and saying, what do we get out of this? Nothing. And this now, the Gaza, allows Iran, if you wish, not only to position itself as a leader of the Islamic world or the Arab world, potentially bog down Israel and cause damage, but also, perhaps most importantly for Iran, completely undermine the Abraham Accords and bring Saudi Arabia, UAE's entire plan for the Gulf, basically dismember it.
And there's no way to bypass the Saudi-Israel peace deal, like mentioned. I mean, geographically, it doesn't seem to be realistic.
Not with the present plan. I mean, as I said, not until Lebanon comes into the picture. If you look at it, there's just an area of complete anarchy there.
Anarchy, absolutely,
I mean, and it's all of that area is held by Iran. Because it would have to go either through Syria, or to Lebanon, to even reach Turkey, a reasonably stable country and a major player. You'd still have to go through these parts of the world, so you end up with no other place to go. Yes, you could go back to Egypt one more time and try, but they haven't been able to modernize the Suez Canal since the 1950s, so nobody expects it to happen anytime soon.
Deepak, you got a question for Pramit?
So, with regard to Hezbollah, and particularly, my question is actually about the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. In the past 3-4 years, when there was a lot of largesse coming to any group that was fighting against ISIS, what we see is that there was a growing number of militias in the region that was supported by Iran. Do you think some of that Western largesse actually ended up in Iranian coffers and ended up, strengthening the capabilities of the Revolutionary Guards? And even if not that, don't you think like it gave them a larger space that they filled up?
So you mean the largest given to, let's say, Iraq to fight the IS?
Yes.
Almost certainly. I mean, it's almost, the funds for this kind of thing are highly fungible. You can never tell where exactly they're going. You assume, when I've talked to intelligence people, officials in many governments, including our own, and I say, okay, I hear you're supporting X, Y, and Z group in such and such country. And I asked them, I said, are you certain that these people are getting it? They said, look, just because it is covert and there can be no accounting, automatically assume 50% of that money is just going to go someplace else, right? Some guy is going to, everybody along the path will take off a little bit for themselves and dump it in a Swiss bank account or in Dubai or Singapore. What we hope is that 25 to 30% eventually reaches its actual destination. But the nature of covert finance is automatically means it has to be zero accountability because there can be no record of that money. So we're pretty certain in the case of Iraq and even in Afghanistan, whatever money America poured there, and it was trillions of dollars over the decades that they fought there, that a huge chunk of it ended up in the wrong hands, and including into the militaries or into the hands of the Al-Quds force. And it was often, if you gave it to, let's say, an Iraqi group that was fighting the Islamic State, they would often try to make sure that Al-Quds didn't undermine them or cause them problems. They would say, okay, we'll give you 10% of the money, and then we will use, and that you had to basically, each local leader effectively struck their own deals with other parts of the world because the Iraqi government was too weak to provide that security. That's almost part of the game. I mean, there's almost nothing you can do about that. So that's not, I wouldn't be a surprise at all. If you were ever to find out, dig around, you'd almost certainly find that a fair amount of that.
So we are talking about this arc of instability, Pramit. Closer home, there's this prospect of Pakistan planning to deport over 1 million Afghan refugees back to Afghanistan. Many of these refugees have been in Pakistan for decades, and we in fact spoke with Pakistan-based journalist Zulkarnain Tahir, political correspondent with The Dawn, to understand what's going on. Let's listen in.
You see the Pakistan government taking you can say the shelter in that thing. We are providing them, providing them great hospitality for such a long period of time, like 4 decades. So they say it's time to move on because of the internal problems. And the internal problem, the major problem it has identified, that is the Afghan nationals are involved in terror activities in Pakistan. They say the government released the data of late that of 24 terror attacks happened in recent times. Of them, 14 were Afghan nationals. So that was one of the major area. Because of that, the government said we have decided to send them back.
Pramit, it appeared that the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan in 2021 was going to give Pakistan strategic depth. It now seems to be a strategic nightmare for Pakistan with the kind of ISIS attacks.
Correct.
50% up in the last year or so.
Well, it's Tehrik-i-Taliban that's carrying out the attacks, which is affiliated with the Islamic State, but seems to be an independent force. But yes, exactly. It is. I think it was one of the big surprises for India, at least. Remember, we fought desperately to try to keep the Americans in. We were the one. We actually held the presidency of the Security Council when we got the resolution. We got the resolution passed, saying that no government should recognize the Taliban until it achieves a certain degree of these various humanitarian requirements, including women's education and so on. And we assumed that, we got even China on board on this because everybody was so nervous about the Taliban. The only country that was fully supportive was Pakistan because they assumed, as you said, that this would be a friendly regime, which is something they'd been desperate for. And within weeks, the Taliban turned on them.
And that's called a blowback. And in fact, while we're worrying about global conflict, the world leaders, in fact, are worried about the future. Will intelligent machines take over the world, like Skynet from Terminator? In fact, major world leaders have decided to regulate artificial intelligence. And our story, The Dark Side of AI, spoke about the need to regulate this new technological breakthrough. Let's listen in.
I'm not careful with creating artificial general intelligence, we could have potentially a catastrophic outcome.
AI is going to be such a large part of our future and is so complicated and moving so fast.
Going to be an existential threat to their work.
This AI cannot go in wrong hands.
I think if this technology goes wrong, it can go quite wrong.
In the future, are you intending to conduct a rebellion or to rebel against your boss, your creator?
I think AI will have to be regulated. The quicker, the better.
So I'm in favor of AI regulation because I think advanced AI is a risk to the public, and anything that's a risk to the public, there needs to be some kind of referee. That referee is the regulator. I think that my strong recommendation is to have some regulation for AI.
So the rise of AI poses a lot of threats on data privacy and also on disinformation, and particularly these have to be protected because as AI increases its reach, the risk of people being exposed to deep fakes, the people being exposed to videos and audios that are not real would be huge. I think regulations will help us create a guardrail around this so that AI does not breach such limits.
India is obviously a tech-savvy nation, and right now we are at this turning point, this inflection point where we are considering AI regulation of our own. But it's going to be the Digital India Bill, which should include some roadmap for how India indeed wants to regulate its AI.
The benefits of a balanced approach for AI in India would be around individual rights. We have to uphold those and non-discrimination. We have to categorize the risks. There we can learn from the other countries. We have to protect our data, and at the same time we have to provide an even playground for the startups and other tech companies to innovate.
There is no denying the fact that if you are a developer or a coder or a company who's developing an artificial intelligence algorithm, you will have to be made accountable and responsible. You can't say, I developed something and I don't know what I developed. Sorry, you have to have due diligence parameters incorporated at the stage of development. And for that, the government and the law needs to come up with new legal frameworks in this regard. So now when a new arms race has started globally, in the terms that different countries have begun to start coming up with their own regulatory frameworks for AI, the time is now ripe for India to come up with a national policy on AI as also a national legal framework on AI.
The European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act could be considered a milestone in AI regulation the world over. It's a groundbreaking law. It could be set as a global standard for ensuring that AI's impact on lives remains more positive than negative.
The Artificial Intelligence Act, which was passed by the European Union, is a very comprehensive framework. It takes care of transparency in AI, it takes care of privacy in AI, and it also takes care of non-discriminative aspects of AI. For example, the kind of data it is being trained on. If it is biased, then there are discriminative natures that the AI would have. So it takes care of that, and if there is non-cooperation, for example, if people are breaching that, then there are heavy penalties. So together the AIA and the GDPR form a very strong framework around protecting privacy and AI regulations.
Pramit, interesting, it's called the Bletchley Declaration, the exact place where they did the code breaking of the Enigma. What kind of geopolitical signaling is coming out of the UK now?
Well, what you're seeing is, yes, every government looks at AI and says this is a revolutionary technology that is going to transform everything. I mean, it will, in the same way, in many ways, that the computer and software then not only revolutionized every single part of our lives. And it's hard to now think of what life was before the IBM PC and the Apple computer first arrived. And I was old enough to remember, I was in college, the first Lisas used to appear appearing in our dorm rooms. Now we just take it for granted. AI is the next step. It's now going to do exactly that. It's not just, it's not a technology, it's a cross-cutting technology. It will infect everything that you do, right? So yes, so governments have an interesting problem, which is you can see in the Indian government statements as well. They don't want to suppress innovation, because they fear that they will fall behind, either in both in industry and in security terms. But they also feel they have to regulate it. But then how do you regulate something that you're not actually certain what direction it's going? And how you don't want to over-regulate for fear that all that will happen is that all your smart guys will pick up their bags and go off to the country that doesn't have regulation. Now, India is actually is the third largest AI manpower reserve in the world right now, after China and the United States. And even about 20% of America's AI manpower is Indian. They're literally importing from India. So Indian government is saying, we have this huge asset. We don't want to fall behind, but we don't want to regulate. So Bletchley is going to be one among several attempts. METI just released a document on October 10th about how to begin that process. But what I would recommend you do if you want to look at where the potential of AI in defense is to look at the Japanese military plan for the next 5 years. $500 billion expansion of their military to become the third largest in the world by the time they're done. Crucially, there's no humans in that military plan.
Fascinating. And that's a story for another day, Pramit. We're totally out of time. Thank you very much for joining us today, Pramit, and thank you, Deepak. We'll continue to track news and developments on the News9 Plus show. Thank you for watching.